There's a kind of waiting that doesn't look like waiting. It doesn't pace. It doesn't cry at the window. It gets up before the sun, feeds the animals, mends the same fence it mended yesterday, and it keeps its face so still that strangers call it peace. I lived next to that kind of waiting for 11 years, and I never once had the sense to name it. I thought she was just a quiet woman who liked the far ridge. I thought the grave she kept was her mother's. Then a man rode out of a July storm with a dead horse under him, and a name on his cracked lips. A name I hadn't heard spoken aloud since before my own wife passed. And every quiet thing I thought I understood about the woman on the next claim turned out to be a door I'd walked past 10,000 times without ever trying the handle. He came to claim his future bride. He did not know she had never once stopped waiting for him. He did not know what waiting had cost her. And I, an old fool with a ledger and a bad knee and no business in any of it, I was the one holding the piece that could break them both, or bind them, depending on whether I had the courage to say it out loud. Stay with me. This one I've been carrying a long time, and I've never told it right until now. The storm came in from the Chiricahuas the way trouble always does out here, quiet first, then all at once. I'd been standing under the porch overhang counting the seconds between the lightning and the thunder, the way my father taught me and his father taught him, when I saw the shape on the flat below the water tank. A horse, going wrong. You learn the difference from a distance if you've spent your life among animals. A horse that's tired moves like it's arguing with the ground, and a horse that's dying moves like it's already made peace with it. This one had made peace. The man on its back had not. He was flogging it, not cruel exactly, but frantic, the way a man does when the thing carrying him is the only thing between him and the thing he's afraid of. I couldn't hear him over the rain, but I could see his mouth working, calling something, or someone. I keep a ledger. I should say that now because it matters to how I remember all this. Every night for 40 years I've written down the weather, the count of the herd, what broke and what got fixed, who came by and what they wanted. My wife used to tease me that I'd write down my own funeral if they gave me a minute after. It's not a diary. I don't put my heart in it. I put the facts in it, and I've found that if you keep the facts long enough, the heart shows up on its own, uninvited in the margins. So I know the exact date. July the 9th. I know the rain started at 4 in the afternoon, and the man came off the flat at 5:15, and by the time I got down there with a lantern and my old sharps across my back, a man doesn't go toward a stranger unarmed out here, not even a dying one. The horse had gone down for good. It fell the way big animals fall, all at once and terrible, and the man went with it and didn't get his leg free in time. I heard him make a sound I've made myself, the year my wife went, a sound that isn't for the pain in your body. Easy, I said, which is a stupid thing to say to a man pinned under a dead horse in a lightning storm, but it's what I had. He turned his face up to me. Young. Younger than I'd guessed from the way he rode. Maybe 30, but a hard 30, the kind you get in places I've heard about and never wanted to see. He had a beard grown out of neglect rather than choice, and a scar that pulled one eyebrow up so he looked permanently like he was asking a question. And his eyes, I'll say it plain, his eyes were the eyes of a man who had spent a long time in a small place. Nayeli, he said. I stopped. My hand stopped on the cinch I was cutting. I hadn't heard that name in a long time. Not because it was rare, though it was, but because the woman who wore it out here had, somewhere along the years, stopped answering to it. On the tax rolls and at the mercantile and in the mouths of the few neighbors close enough to have an opinion, she was Anna. Anna Reyes, the widow on the Redwater claim, quiet, kept to herself, good with horses and better with silence. I'd known her 11 years, and I could count on one hand the times I'd heard her Apache name, and every one of those times it had been her mother's voice, and her mother had been in the ground 9 years. Say that again, I told him. Nayeli, he gripped my wrist. His hand was cold and there was more strength in it than a pinned man ought to have. Is she, do you know her? You flinched. You know her. I'm cutting you loose first, I said. Then we'll talk about who I know. It took the both of us the better part of an hour to get him free. And by we I mean me doing the lifting and him doing the swearing. And by the time we had him up on my mule and headed for the house, the storm had blown itself north, and the whole desert was steaming in that strange dusk light you only get after a hard rain, everything gone gold and silver and smelling like wet creosote, which is the best smell in the world, and I will fight any man who says different. His name was Caleb Doyle. He didn't tell me that until we were inside and I'd got a fire going and some coffee into him and looked at his leg, which wasn't broken but was going to be the color of a thunderhead by morning. He told me his name the way a man tells you his name when he's used to it being a problem, watching to see what it did to my face. It didn't do anything to my face. I'm from back east originally, and I came out here in '61 to get away from a war, and I have made it a policy for going on 30 years not to know any more about a man's past than he wants me to know. Out here everybody's running from something. The only rude question is which direction. But I'll be honest with you, because I promised myself I'd tell this one straight. The name meant nothing to me, but the way he said Nayeli meant everything. And I spent that whole first night trying to figure out what a broken-down man with prison in his eyes had to do with the quietest woman in the Redwater Valley. Let me tell you about Anna, about Nayeli, about the woman, because you can't understand what came after unless you understand what she was, and I'm not sure I understood it myself until that summer, which shames me to admit. She came to the valley the same year I lost my wife, which is maybe why I paid attention when I didn't pay attention to much of anything for a while. I was in a black fog that year. I'd walked the fence line and not remember walking it. And into that fog rode a young woman and an old woman on a wagon with a mule I'd have paid good money for, and they took up the Redwater claim that had stood empty since the Prutes got burned out, and they started, quietly and without asking anybody's permission or opinion, to make it live again. The old woman was Apache, Chiricahua. This was not a popular thing to be in the territory in those years. I'll say that carefully and leave the rest to your imagination, because the things that were done in those years were done by men who called themselves civilized, and I have no stomach for repeating them. The young woman was, I didn't know what she was. Her skin was darker than mine and lighter than her mother's. Her eyes were her mother's eyes. But she spoke English like a schoolteacher and Spanish like a priest and Apache like a daughter. And she wore her hair sometimes one way and sometimes another. And I came to understand slowly, over years, that she was a woman assembled out of pieces that the world had never intended to fit together, and that she had done the fitting herself, alone, with her bare hands. Her mother told me once, the old woman liked me, God knows why, maybe because I never asked her anything, that Nayeli had been born at San Carlos. You may not know what that means. San Carlos was the reservation they herded the Apache onto, and it was a bad place, a low-fever place by the river where they put people who were used to mountains, and a great many died there who should not have. Nayeli's father was a white man, a man who'd worked at the agency, and the way the old woman told it, he had loved them both truly and completely, right up until the season it became inconvenient to be a white man with an Apache wife, at which point he had discovered, as such men do, that his love had a season, and the season was ending. I don't want to be unfair to a dead man I never met. Maybe there was more to it. There usually is. But the shape of it was, he left. And the old woman took her daughter and left too, before San Carlos could kill them the way it was killing everyone else, and they went into the years, the wandering years, the hiding years, and somewhere in those years, before they ever came to my valley, there was a young man. I didn't know about the young man. Not for 11 years. That's the thing that undoes me still when I turn it over. I lived next to her for 11 years. I ate at her table and she at mine. I helped her bury her mother, and she sat up with me the night my old dog died, and neither of us said much because neither of us needed to. I thought I knew her the way you know a good neighbor, completely, in the specific and limited way that's all a neighbor is owed. And I never knew there was a man she was waiting for. Because that's what the stillness was. That's what I couldn't name. Every evening, no matter the season, no matter the weather, Anna Reyes would climb the low ridge behind her house and stand looking east until the light went. I thought she was praying. I thought it was grief for her mother or for a life. Once drunk, I even thought, and I'm ashamed of this, that she was simply strange, the way solitary people go strange, and that the ridge was her strangeness. She was watching the road. She had been watching the road for 11 years. Caleb slept 14 hours. When he woke, I had bacon going, and he came to the table moving like every joint had opinions. And he ate like a man who'd learned not to trust that food would still be there if he slowed down. And I let him eat before I asked him anything, because that's manners. Then I asked him, "How do you know Nayeli?" He put his fork down. "Careful, you do know her. I asked you a question." He looked at me a long moment, weighing it, the way he weighed everything. I'd learned that about him, that he'd been somewhere that taught him to weigh every word before he spent it, like a man down to his last coins. Then he said, "We were promised, before, a long time ago. Promised to be married." He said it and then he laughed, one short broken sound with no humor in it. I know how that sounds, looking at me, I know. "I'm not looking at you any particular way. You're a bad liar, old man." He was right, I was. He told me the rest of it over that breakfast and into the afternoon, in pieces, out of order, the way real stories come. And I wrote none of it in the ledger because it wasn't the ledger's kind of thing. And I've regretted that a little, because I've had to carry it in the softer and less reliable book of my own memory ever since. They'd met in the wandering years. He'd been young, 19, 20, a drover and sometime horsebreaker working the country between the Territory and Sonora, and he'd come across a Chiricahua woman and her daughter camped where they shouldn't have been, in danger from about 4 different directions, and instead of doing what most men of his time and place would have done, he'd helped them, guided them through a stretch of bad country, stayed a season, then another. "I wasn't a good man," he told me. "I want to be clear. I don't want you thinking I was some I'd done things before her. I ran with men you wouldn't have in your barn, but she," and here he stopped, and his hand made a gesture and gave up because there aren't words for it and he knew there weren't and he had the grace not to reach for the cheap ones. "She looked at me like I was already the man I hadn't figured out how to be yet. And I wanted to be him, for her. That's the whole of it. That's the only good thing I ever did, wanting to be a better man for a woman who deserved one." The old woman had given her blessing. That surprised me and I said so, and he almost smiled. She didn't trust me at first, rightly, but she was dying even then. The fevers from that place, they never left her lungs, and I think she was doing sums. A daughter alone in that country, a half-white daughter who'd fit in no camp and no town. She looked at me and she did the arithmetic and she decided I was better than nothing. He rubbed his face. "That's a hell of a thing to build a life on, better than nothing. But I'd have made it enough. I swear to God I'd have made it enough." "What happened?" And this is where his face changed, and I saw the small place come back into his eyes, and I understood that whatever he was about to tell me was the thing that had put it there. There'd been a killing, not his but near enough to his that it didn't matter. A cattleman dead and a posse, and a young drover with a bad reputation and Apache friends, and no witnesses to speak for him, because his only witnesses were an Apache woman and her daughter, and what was their word worth in the Territory in those years? Less than nothing. Less than the rope they were measuring for him. "I told her to run," he said. "I told her, I said, if they take me, you take your mother and you go, you don't wait, you don't come to the hanging, you go and you make a life and you forget you ever knew a man named Caleb Doyle. I made her promise. I made her promise me she'd forget." He looked at his hands. "They didn't hang me. That's the joke of it. A witness turned up, a real one, a boy who'd seen the actual thing, turned up 6 weeks in and they couldn't hang me, but they'd already decided I was the kind of man who ought to be somewhere. So they gave me 11 years in the Yuma prison for things I mostly hadn't done and 1 or 2 I had, and I did the 11 years, old man. I did every day of them. And the whole time." His voice went, he got it back. The whole time I told myself she'd done what I said, that she'd forgotten, that she was somewhere with a husband and children and a good life and she'd never once think of me, and that was what I wanted. It was the only thing I could give her from in there. I could want that for her. I could want her free of me so hard it was almost like doing something. But you came looking, I said. But I came looking. He met my eye. Because I'm a weak man when you get right down to it. Because 11 years is a long time to want somebody to forget you, and 11 years is exactly long enough to stop being able to bear it. I told myself I'd just make sure, see her happy from a distance and go. I told myself a lot of things. He laughed the broken laugh again. A man in a cell tells himself a great many things. Some of them he half believes. I sat there in my own kitchen with the afternoon coming through the window, and I thought about the ridge behind the Redwater house, and the woman standing on it every evening for 11 years, watching a road, and I understood, all at once, the way the storm had come, exactly what I was holding. She hadn't forgotten him. She had done the opposite of forgetting him with such ferocity, and for so long that it had become the shape of her whole life. The stillness I'd mistaken for peace. The ridge I'd mistaken for grief. The name she'd let fall away because the only mouth she wanted to hear it from was locked in a stone box 100 miles west. And here was the mouth, sitting at my table, not knowing. I want to tell you I said it plainly. That I'm a good enough man that when I understood what I understood, I laid it out for him clean and let the two of them find each other. I didn't, not right away. And I've spent a long time asking myself why, and the honest answer, the ledger answer, the facts first answer is that I was afraid. Because I'd heard something in the valley, 3 days before the storm. Something I hadn't put together with Anna at all until this exact moment. And now that the pieces were sliding into place, I could feel the shape of a disaster in them. And I didn't know if telling Caleb Doyle where his Nayeli was would be handing him the thing he'd crossed the territory for, or walking him straight into a grave. "Where is she?" he said, quiet. He'd read my face again, damn him. "You know, tell me, please. I've come a long way to be told no. I can take a no. What I can't take is you sitting there deciding whether I'm allowed." I looked at him. Outside, far off, I heard it again, the thing I'd heard 3 days before and pretended not to. Horses. More than one. Coming up the valley road slow, the way men ride when they're not in a hurry because they're sure of where the thing they're hunting is going to be. Caleb heard it too. I watched him hear it. I watched something in him go very still and very old, the stillness of a man who has spent 11 years listening for footsteps in a corridor and knows exactly what a certain kind of footstep means. "Old man," he said, not looking away from the window, "who else is looking for her?" And I realized I was going to have to tell him everything, and I realized I might already be too late. I'll tell you what I'd heard 3 days before the storm, because Caleb made me tell it, and because you need it too. There was a man named Ford. Sutton Ford. He'd bought up most of the north end of the valley over the last 2 years, the way men like Ford buy things, a little with money and a lot with the understanding that it's easier to sell to him than to keep refusing. He wanted the Redwater claim. It sat on the only reliable water for 6 miles, and Ford was a cattleman, and cattle need water more than they need anything. And Anna had told him no 3 times, which was 3 times more than most people told Sutton Ford no. What I'd heard, in the mercantile, from a man who'd have been wiser to keep it behind his teeth, was that Ford had gone and had his lawyer look into Anna Ray's, and Ford's lawyer had turned up something. That the Redwater claim had been filed by a widow, and that there was no record of any Mr. Ray's ever having lived or died, and that a claim filed under false pretenses could be contested, and that a woman who was not who she said she was, a woman who was, when you pulled the thread, a half-Apache woman using a dead Mexican woman's name to hold land in a territory that did not, in those years, permit an Apache to hold much of anything. Such a woman had no more standing to keep her water than a jackrabbit. That's what Ford had. Not a gun, worse than a gun, Paper. The kind of paper that in those years was more lethal than any gun because a gun you could at least see coming. And now Ford's men were coming up the road. Caleb was already moving. I've seen a lot of men move fast in my life. It's a fast country and a slow man doesn't last. But I'd never seen anything like the way that half-crippled, prison-thin man came up out of my kitchen chair. He had my sharps off the wall before I'd finished my sentence. "That's mine," I said. "You'll get it back." "Your leg." "My leg can hold me up long enough." He was checking the load with hands that knew rifles. "Which way to the Redwater place?" "Point." "Caleb, listen to me. You go down there with a gun and there are 4 of Ford's men and they leave you both in the dirt and it's legal. Do you understand me? It's legal because you're an escape-looking stranger and she's a—" I couldn't finish it. The word they'd use. I wouldn't say it in my own house. He stopped, and for a second the fury went out of him and something worse came in, something patient and terrible, and he said, "You think I don't know how it works? I did 11 years learning exactly how it works. You don't beat men like Ford with a gun. I know that." He set the rifle down, gentle, on the table. "But I'm not going to sit in your kitchen while they do it either. So you can point me the way or I'll find it myself, but I'm going." She waited, his voice cracked clean in half on the word and he let it, didn't try to hide it, and that was somehow the most frightening thing he'd done yet. "You said she waited. 11 years, on a ridge, watching a road. I heard you not say it, old man, I heard it plain. She waited for me for 11 years and I will not let her spend the 12th watching Sutton Ford take her water. Now point." I pointed. And then, God help me, I got my other rifle and I went with him. An old fool with a bad knee. I told myself it was because it was my land the road crossed and my neighbor at the end of it. That was true. It wasn't the reason. The reason was that I'd stood by a lot of things in 30 years in that valley, kept my head down and my ledger straight and minded my own business while the country did what the country did, and I was tired, suddenly and completely, of being a man who minded his own business. I was 63 years old and I had never once put myself between a strong man and a weak one, and I found I did not want to die having never done it. That's all. That's the whole of my courage. It came late and it came selfish and it came anyway. We took the low wash so Ford's men wouldn't see us come, and we came up behind the Redwater house through the mesquite, and we got there in time to see it start. 4 men, like I'd said. Ford himself on a good gray horse, staying back clean the way that kind stays clean. His foreman, a man named Pell, doing the talking. And Anna Nayeli, standing on her own porch in the last of the daylight with her arms folded and her face doing the thing I'd watched it do for 11 years. The stillness. Except now I knew what the stillness was and it broke my heart to look at it. She wasn't calm. She had simply been holding herself so hard for so long that holding was all her face remembered how to do. Pell was reading off a paper. I couldn't hear the words, but I knew the shape. The claims contested. You've no legal standing. You've got till the end of the month, or till sundown, or till whenever Ford had decided, and here's the paper that says so. And there's no court in the territory that'll hear you, ma'am, and you know it, and we know you know it. Caleb stopped at the edge of the mesquite. I nearly ran into him. He was looking at her, just looking. 11 years. I watched him drink her in, the whole ruin and glory of her, older than the girl he'd left, thinner, harder, alive. And I watched the thing happen to him that I'd been half afraid of and half hoping for, which was that all the fury and all the fear drained out of his face and left something so naked I had to look away. A man does not get to look at another man's face at a moment like that. It isn't decent. "Don't," I said very low. "Don't run out there. You run out there with a rifle, you kill her. You understand? Whatever Ford's got on paper, the second a stranger comes out of the brush with a gun, they've got the right to shoot, and they'll shoot you and they'll shoot her for good measure, and Ford'll have his water by supper and a clean story to tell. Don't hand it to him. Think." I saw him think. I saw it cost him. "Then what?" he breathed. "Old man, then what do I do? Tell me what to do." And this is the part I've turned over more nights than I can count, because I didn't have an answer. I'm not a clever man. I keep a ledger. I know weather and cattle and how to set a fence. I did not know how to beat Sutton Ford's paper, and I'd had 3 days to think about it and come up with nothing, and now there was no time left at all. But Caleb had 11 years in a cell learning the one thing I'd never had to learn, which is how a powerless man survives a powerful one. And I watched him find it. I watched it come up in his face, slow, terrible, and I watched him understand what it was going to cost, and I watched him decide to pay it anyway. Ford wants the claim clean, he said. Legal. That's why he brought paper instead of fire. He wants to be able to say he did it right. So a man like that, a man who needs it clean, the thing he can't stand isn't a gun. It's a witness. It's a story he can't control. He turned to me and his eyes were doing arithmetic, the same arithmetic the old woman had done years ago, weighing what was better than nothing. You said no record of a Mr. Ray's. That's his whole case. There was never a husband. There wasn't. There is now, Caleb said. I didn't understand. Then I did, and it took the breath out of me. You can't, I said. Caleb, you're an escaped. You look like the second they run your name you're a criminal, an outsider. It makes it worse. I did my 11 years, he said. I'm not escaped. I'm out. Paroled or close enough. I've got paper of my own in my saddlebag on the horse that's dead in your yard, but I've got it. I'm a free man, God help me, free and legal and white, and out here that last one's the only word in the sentence that matters, and we both know it. The bitterness in it could have stripped paint. A white husband, old man, with papers, married to her before God and before she ever filed that claim. You think Ford's lawyer can contest that? You think Ford wants that story going around that he tried to run a white war veteran and his lawful wife off their land over a technicality? He was already checking himself, straightening, becoming, in front of my eyes, someone respectable, someone with standing, a thing he had not been for 11 years and had crossed a territory to stop being. It's the one thing I've got that's worth anything to her. The one thing. And it's the exact thing I came here swearing I'd never make her take, because she deserves a man who's more than a set of papers and a white face. He looked at Nayeli on the porch. The men, the paper, the sundown. But better than nothing, he said, so quiet I almost lost it. That's what her mother saw in me. Better than nothing. Turns out she was right. Turns out that's exactly what I am and exactly what she needs, and I don't get to be proud about it. And he walked out of the mesquite with his hands open and empty, and up where everyone could see them, into the last light, toward the men with the paper, toward the woman on the porch, calling out in a loud, clear, steady voice that carried all the way to where I stood frozen in the brush. Sutton Ford, you're standing on my land and speaking to my wife, and unless you've got a paper that beats a marriage, you've got nothing at all. I've thought a long time about how to tell you what happened on Nayeli's face when she heard his voice. I can't. I've tried in the ledger and out of it, and every word I reach for is too small. She had been holding herself for 11 years, and I watched 11 years let go all at once. I watched a woman who I had genuinely believed did not know how to break, not into pieces, not falling down, nothing so simple. She turned toward the voice like a plant turns, like it was the most fundamental thing in the world and there was no choice in it, and her folded arms came undone, and she said one word, and the word was his name. And she said it the way you say a name you have been saving in your mouth so long it's worn smooth. Ford's men had their hands near their guns. Caleb kept walking, hands up and open, straight through the middle of them. And there is a kind of courage that isn't about guns at all. And I saw it that evening. I saw an unarmed man walk through 4 armed ones, because the thing on the far side of them was worth more than the risk of the walk. He stopped at the foot of her porch. I was too far to hear what passed between them, and I'm glad. Some things aren't for a witness, but I saw her come down the steps. I saw her take his face in both her hands, the beard and the scar and the 11 years of it, and I saw her look at him the way he'd said she used to, like he was already the man he hadn't figured out how to be. And I saw that she still saw that man, that 11 years hadn't rubbed it out, that she'd been keeping that too, keeping the sight of who he could be on a ridge every evening, watching a road. Ford left. I'll be quick about Ford because he doesn't deserve much of my page. He was a coward the way rich men are cowards, which is to say without any melodrama and with a great deal of paperwork, and he did exactly what Caleb had bet he'd do. He weighed the water against the story, the technicality against a white veteran and his lawful wife and an old rancher witness who'd backed their play, and he decided the Redwater claim wasn't worth the version of himself he'd have to become to take it. He touched his hat cold and said something about a misunderstanding, and he took his men and his paper and his good gray horse back down the road, and as far as I know, he never troubled her again. Men like Ford always have another valley. They were married that autumn, proper at the mission, though as far as the law was concerned Caleb had already made them married the moment he called it out across the yard, and neither of them ever corrected the timeline for the county's benefit, and neither did I. My ledger for that October has a line in it that isn't weather or cattle. It says, C and N wed, then it says, stood witness. That's all. I told you I don't put my heart in the ledger. But that second line, a man doesn't write stood witness about a thing he only watched. He writes it about a thing he was part of. So maybe the heart got in after all, the way it does, uninvited in the margins. I want to end this honestly because I promised I would, and an honest ending isn't a tidy one. It wasn't simple after. I'd like to tell you the waiting was over and the two of them were happy and that was that, and it would be a lie, and Nayeli of all people had earned better than my lies. 11 years is not undone in a season. There were weeks that first year Caleb couldn't sleep in a bed and took his blankets out to the barn, because a man who slept 11 years in a stone box doesn't learn soft again all at once, and there were mornings I saw Nayeli standing on that ridge still, out of habit, watching a road she no longer needed to watch, and having to remind her own feet that the waiting was done. I saw them be strangers to each other some days, two people who'd fallen in love as different, younger, unbroken people, and now had to do the harder thing, which is fall in love a second time with who the years had actually made them. That's not the story in the songs. The songs stop at the reunion. I lived next to the after, and the after is where the real courage is, and I watched two stubborn, wounded people spend it, day on day, choosing each other awake instead of asleep on purpose, when it would have been easier to be strangers. Nayeli kept her water. She kept her name too, in the end, both of them, Anna for the county and Nayeli for her husband and her God and herself. A woman still assembled out of pieces the world never meant to fit, except now there were two sets of hands doing the fitting instead of one. The old woman was right. Her arithmetic held. Better than nothing turned out in the long, slow proof of it to be very nearly everything. I'm an old man now, older than I have any business being, and my knees worse and my ledger's nearly full, and I don't ride the fence line myself anymore. But some evenings I still walk up to the low place behind my house and look east down the valley road, the way she used to, and I understand it now in a way I never could before, the waiting that doesn't look like waiting. How a person can hold a thing so long and so quiet that even they forget they're holding it, until the day it's set down, and their arms don't know what to do, and they find out how heavy it was only by the ache of finally letting it go. He came to claim his future bride. He learned she'd never stopped waiting. What I learned, the old fool in the margins, the man who stood witness, was that the waiting was never the sad part. The sad part would have been if no one had ever,